My life was a magic trick. For 5 years, I was Julian the Alchemist, the biggest thing in magic since, well, the last guy. I sold out theaters. I did TV specials. My hands, my fast, precise, impossible to track hands, were my entire brand. I was a master of illusion, a wunderkind. And then one night in Vegas, during a live, televised high-stakes trick, I just froze. The wires were visible. The trick was exposed. The illusion was gone. And so was I. I didn't just flame out, I evaporated. I took my money, I changed my name, back to my boring, given name, Adam, and I disappeared into the one place I knew no one would ever look for me. A tiny, fog-shrouded town in coastal Maine, where the biggest entertainment was the tide. I got a job at a coffee shop. I, a man who once levitated a motorcycle, was now a master of the latte foam swirl. My hands, once insured by Lloyd's of London, were now just hands. They got sticky. They got burned. And at night, they ached with a useless, restless, phantom energy. I was 29 years old, and my life was a disappearing act that had actually worked. I was gone. My only escape from the endless, grinding steam wands was to wander. The town had one single interesting street, and on that street was one single interesting shop. Thorn and Son Clockmakers. EST 1923. It was a place out of time. The air inside smelled of brass polish, old wood, and something clean like ozone. The entire shop was filled with the sound of 100 different hearts, all ticking out of sync. It was the most chaotic, beautiful sound I had ever heard. The son part of the sign, I assumed, was the man who was always at the back workbench. He was a fixture like the massive, grandfather clock in the corner. His name was Sam. He was probably in his late 40s, with a shock of prematurely gray hair, a pair of thick-lensed glasses, and the most patient hands I'd ever seen. He was the anti-me. My magic was about speed, about dazzling the eye. His was about slowing down. His was about making time itself work again. I started going in every day on my lunch break. I never bought anything. I just watched. I'd stand by the counter, sipping my own bad coffee, and just watch him work. He'd be at his bench, a jeweler's loop pressed to his eye, disassembling a tiny, intricate clockwork mechanism that was smaller than my thumb. He ignored me mostly, which was perfect. I was just a ghost in his shop. But I was studying him. I was watching his craft. He was a master, but his hands, I noticed, were slow. They were big and strong and a little stiff. I saw him struggle. I'd watch him try to pick up a microscopic screw with a pair of tweezers, his fingers fumbling, his breath held in a cloud of frustration. He had the knowledge, but he was losing the dexterity. One afternoon, I was in my usual spot. He was working on something special. It was an automaton, an 18th century, brass and enamel birdcage with a tiny clockwork bird inside. It was beautiful, and it was broken. "Damn it," he whispered, his voice a low, frustrated growl. He'd been trying for 20 minutes to reseat a tiny, sprung gear deep inside the mechanism. His tweezers were too big, his angle was all wrong. He was trying to force it, and I could see the tiny, delicate spring tensing up, about to snap. You're fighting it," I said. The words were out before I could stop them. He froze. He slowly, deliberately, put his tweezers down. He lifted the loop from his eye and turned to look at me. His eyes were gray, and they were tired and annoyed. "What? You're fighting it," I said, my heart starting to hammer. I put my coffee down. "You're trying to go against the tension. You need to use the spring's own energy to reseat the gear." He just stared at me. "And what do you know about 18th century spring-loaded automata, coffee boy?" "I know hands," I said, and the words were truer than anything I'd said in a year. I know how to make small things go where I want them to." He looked at me. He looked at my hands, my soft, uncalloused coffee shop hands. And then he looked at the impossible, broken birdcage. He let out a long, slow sigh. He was defeated. "Fine," he said, shoving his stool back. "You're so smart. You try. You break it, you bought it." I walked behind the counter. My pulse was a drum solo. I wasn't Julian the Alchemist. I was just Adam, the guy who made lattes. I sat down at the bench. It was covered in tiny, beautiful, logical tools. I picked up the loop. I put it to my eye. The tiny, brass world of the clockwork jumped into focus. I saw the problem. The gear, the spring, the tiny pin it was supposed to sit on. Sam was right. It was a nightmare. "You're shaking," he said, his voice gruff, now standing over my shoulder. "I know," I whispered. My hands were shaking. Not with fear. With purpose. They were on. They knew what to do. "Okay," I said, and my voice changed. It wasn't Adam's voice. It was my old voice, the one I used on stage. Calm, confident, in complete control. I'm going to need your help. My help? I can't do it if you're just hovering. I need you to be my assistant. I need you to hold the base. Firmly. Both hands. Don't let it move. Don't breathe. Just be a rock. He hesitated, then his big, rough hands enveloped the base of the delicate birdcage. He was a human vice. Good, I said. I picked up 2 tools. A pair of fine-point tweezers and a thin, steel dental pick. This was sleight of hand. This was all it ever was. Okay, I'm going in. My hands were perfectly, completely still. I didn't go for the gear. That was the sucker's move. That was the magic. I went for the spring. I used the dental pick to apply a tiny, almost invisible counter-pressure to the spring, just enough to misdirect it, to make it want to move. I was creating an illusion just for the machine. I was convincing it. The tension on the spring eased. The gear, now free, just settled. Now, I whispered. And with the tweezers, I just nudged it. It clicked, a tiny, perfect, satisfying click, and fell right into place on its pin. I let go. I pulled my hands back. We were both silent. The only sound in the shop was the frantic, out-of-sync ticking of 100 other clocks. Sam just stood there. He was still holding the base of the birdcage. He was staring, not at the mechanism, but at my hands, which were resting, perfectly still on the workbench. How? He said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I've been trying to get that for a week. It's just about knowing the angles, I said, my adrenaline starting to fade. It's a trick. Sam finally let go of the birdcage. He leaned against the workbench, and he looked at me. He looked at me for a long time. There was no anger, no frustration, just a deep, profound, almost reverent curiosity. No, kid, he said, his voice rough. That ain't a trick. That's a goddamn skill. He was quiet for another long moment. You used to be a surgeon? Something like that, I said. He nodded, a slow, thoughtful nod. He looked around his shop, at the shelves full of projects he'd never have time for, at the complex, beautiful things that were just waiting for a hand steady enough to fix them. My hands, he said, holding up his own. They were big and strong and stained. They're good for winding the big tower clocks. They're good for force. But this, the small stuff. I'm too loud. He looked at my hands again. You're not. You're quiet. He walked over to a drawer and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was the mechanism of a Swiss watch, a beautiful, ruined, intricate mess. He put it on the bench in front of me. This one's been in the drawer for 3 years, he said. I'm scared I'll break it. I just looked at it. So, he said, not as a boss, but as a partner. Where do we start?